Okay, good afternoon, um, dear colleagues, dear guests, dear friends who are with us physically in the conference hall today, and also maybe in front of their computers on their screens, watching this live stream of today's faculty workshop on our YouTube live broadcast. It's a pleasure for me to introduce to you Professor Scott Slovic, who has been with us for about 3 weeks now as part of our collaboration with the Fulbright Turkey office as a Fulbright specialist. I'd very briefly like to introduce Scott to you and then leave the floor to him. Scott Slovic is Distinguished Professor of Environmental Humanities at the University of Idaho. He served as founding president of Association for the Study of Literature and Environment, ASLE, as most of us know for short, for the 3 years in the early 90s. And then as editor-in-chief of the journal IO, Interdisciplinary Studies in Literature and Environment, a publication of Oxford University Press, from 1995 to 2020. The author, editor, or co-editor of 30 books. His recent and forthcoming works include Reading Cats and Dogs, Companion Animals in World Literature, Nature and Literary Studies, and the Bloomsbury Handbook to the Medical Environmental Humanities. He currently co-edits the series Routledge Series in World Literatures and the Environment and Routledge Environmental Humanities. So Scott has been with us, as I was saying, for a while now. On 20th of May, he gave this great seminar titled "We're Doomed: The Hopefulness of Eco-Criticism and the Environmental Humanities," especially intended for our undergraduate students, which was followed by 3 graduate seminars. The title of the last one of which was Going Public: Environmental Humanities Responses to a Burning World. The rest of the titles and the dates are obviously, some of you I know have been following, are on the website. So for sake of time efficiency, I'm not going to repeat all of them here. But today, as his last contribution to our Environmental Humanities Center that is actually hosting this program, this visit program, Scott will share with us his deep experiences and wide knowledge of the field on what should be the roles of environmental humanities centers and what are the possible visions and activities. So without further ado, also noting that we will take questions and comments at the end of the session, but then if it naturally follows, we will see also how that goes and maybe more interactive as we go. But I leave the floor to Professor Scott Slovic. Thank you very much. Thank you, Scott.
Thank you. Thanks so much, Sinan. It's with great gratitude that I thank Sinan and many others here at Kapadokya University for being such great hosts during a rather challenging time to have a physical visitor. I think all of us are quite accustomed to interacting and even hosting colleagues virtually, but it's kind of an odd thing to be face-to-face with each other and to deal with some of the challenges of having a newcomer in town, especially during a national lockdown and all of the complexities of that. So I'm greatly appreciative to Sinan and so many others here at Kapadokya University. It's a little strange for me to actually talk to people in the room. Are you sure you're not made of cardboard? Are you real people? At athletic events, I see hands moving. You must be alive. Thank you for proving that to me. This is the first time I've spoken to to a live face-to-face audience in a year and a half. So it'll take me a moment to get over my confusion. And I'm happy that at least I think some attendees are virtual, because that's my comfort zone at the moment. I also, along the lines of what Sinan was saying, I want to thank the Turkish and the American side of the Fulbright program for being brave enough to undertake a Fulbright specialist assignment as the pandemic continues. To my knowledge, I'm one of the early Fulbright specialists to actually get onto an airplane and fly to a different part of the world as the pandemic continues. And I've been sending back reports to the people in Washington, D.C. about my experiences, particularly in airports, and related to COVID testing and other challenges of how to navigate the travel system in order to help other people who may be doing similar things in the coming months. So this is a little bit of an experiment, my being here right now. So this is today's event is not so much a typical lecture with me simply talking about my experiences. I hope it will be more of a workshop format. And I also hope that things that I say will prompt some thoughts and some questions from you, or maybe you came into the room with certain questions about the environmental humanities more broadly, or specifically the role of centers or other academic units in order to support a specific field of study or a specific field of research, like the environmental humanities. So we'll try to make this conversational rather than simply me talking about what I have experienced. So as Sinan said, our focus today will be the concept of environmental humanities centers, and also the some very practical questions about the activities that might happen under the auspices of such a center. And it's perfect that this event is happening with the support of one of the newest and most active environmental humanities centers in the world here on this campus. So I feel very honored to be able to share a few thoughts as a person who has had a little bit of experience with environmental humanities centers, because I served as the founder and director of what may well have been the first environmental humanities center way back in the dark ages of the last century. In 1995, I helped to create and then led the Center for Environmental Arts and Humanities at the University of Nevada, Reno in the US for 7 years. And one of the things I'll talk about, and I'd be happy to go into more depth about this if you have any questions, is why that center lasted for only 7 years. And in fact, it's related to some of the ideas that I have about academic units and their longevity or brevity, and what kind of purpose such organizations serve. And is it a failure if such an organization like an environmental humanities center doesn't last forever? Because when I went into the field, my thought was that a sign of success was permanence. If you could have a building created and other marks of perpetuity, that would be the sign that you had really accomplished something significant. And ephemerality or a lack of permanence was a shortcoming of some kind. But now that I'm old and wise, I have a slightly different view and would like to address that in some of my comments. So during the 7 years of the existence of the Center for Environmental Arts and Humanities, and you actually have some historic documents in your handouts, these brochures. We used paper brochures in those days. We were not relying on websites. These are historical documents from the first Environmental Humanities Center. And this one I created within days of arriving in my faculty position at the University of Nevada in the summer of 1995. because I was I was about to leave for Japan, and I wanted to have a brochure indicating a piece of paper showing that this is a real thing. The center exists. It might not have a room, might not have faculty members who even realize they are affiliated with it, but at least there's a piece of paper, so it's real. And I knew that I was going to be meeting some wealthy people and corporate executives, and I wanted to raise money to try to support our activities. So that was one of the purposes of this document, to make the center physical and real by way of a piece of paper. So during our 7 years, we did quite a lot of things. In fact, we had a blizzard of hectic activities during those years. Dozens of visiting speakers and colloquia, groups of people talking together, graduate student-led seminars, faculty colloquia from our own campus, visitors coming from various other campuses. Everything obviously was live and in person. Nothing was virtual. Nothing was pre-recorded. And everything cost quite a bit of money. So we spent a lot of time working with a small budget and squeezing every bit of energy and life out of our budget, which was, we had $15,000 a year in annual budget. And that was our operating budget. And all of our activities came from that or from other grants that I wrote to various offices on our university campus or other organizations. And so part of our challenge was to make our money count for something, because we couldn't do virtual events and just call on people to Zoom in. Instead, we had to pay for them to travel, and we had to pay for hotels, and in many cases we paid honoraria to support the people who gave us their time and expertise. So we had dozens of speakers and other events every semester for 14 semesters, 7 years. We organized 3 large in-person conferences: the North American Interdisciplinary Conference on Environment and Community. It was a conference that had previously taken place for several years in Utah at another university, and then they heard about our new center and asked if we could help to run the conference. And so we did it every other year for 6 years and brought in several hundred people to give many different kinds of panels. We produced a newsletter every semester, and I'll talk more about this in a few minutes, but you have copies of 3 of our newsletters. And I think these are actually, as I look at them now, I haven't read these carefully in nearly 20 years, but these are interesting historical documents because of what they show about the state of the field 20 or more years ago, and also the kinds of activities that we were involved in. And again, I'll slow down and talk a little bit more about these newsletters in a few minutes. We also published a journal. Shortly after I arrived at the University of Nevada, Reno, I helped to arrange for the Association for the Study of Literature and Environment to adopt the journal ISLE, Interdisciplinary Studies in Literature and Environment. ASLE and ISLE were not originally together. ISLE was started first. The journal was started first. And then when I was involved in creating the organization ASLE, we knew the name of the journal, and we created a name for the organization that mirrored the name of the journal. I was thinking, calculating in my head, someday these would come together and support each other, the journal and the organization. And sure enough, 3 years later, when I moved to the University of Nevada, I was involved in negotiating the organization adopting the journal, and I was appointed to serve as the editor of the journal, and then did it for 25 years. But some of the energy of our Center for Environmental Arts and Humanities was devoted to operating the journal, which was completely a paper journal, and again had a very small budget, and we had to pay for printing and shipping, and we had a lot of volunteer labor. mostly graduate students helping with the journal, and then faculty members like me who did that work in addition to our normal faculty assignments. So, but we affiliated the journal with the center as well as with the organization ASLI as part of our effort to contribute to the field of the environmental arts and humanities. So what I realize now is that the Center for Environmental Arts and Humanities, which we abbreviate as CEAH, and very quickly the acronym CEAH became very well known on our university campus, and I think quite well known within the field in the late 1990s. We began to realize that our purpose was not to become the only center for environmental arts and humanities or the only center for environmental humanities in the world. Our purpose was to inspire more and more centers like ourselves or different in certain ways that were useful to other universities and possibly even other countries. And our goal was to inspire and encourage, not to merely establish the profile and reputation of our own program. So this is related to my sense about the length of existence of our center. For certain organic, evolutionary reasons related to our institution and to the people involved in this center, it made sense to have a relatively brief life, but then to inspire the field to move forward in a lot of different directions. So I take a certain amount of pride, whether I deserve it or not. I take pride in the fact that there is a Center for Environmental Humanities here at Kapadokya University, even if maybe the ancient ancestor of this center doesn't actually exist at the University of Nevada anymore. That the ongoing life of that center exists in this new center, which has a large virtual presence in Cappadocia and throughout Europe, throughout Turkey, throughout Europe, and I think in many other parts of the world. This center here is carrying on the intellectual energy of this earlier center that existed years ago. Before looking at the materials I provided, and maybe glancing at the paper brochures, which are interesting historical documents just to see the sense of the goals of the early center and the people who are affiliated and the range of disciplines they represent, things like that. I thought I would just share some general thoughts with you about academic centers. And I took some notes this morning related to this and thought I would run through these. And then maybe pause a little bit and hear some of your thoughts to make this a little bit more energetic and interactive, and then maybe go into some details about these documents. So, like I said, centers and other academic programs, like human beings, have lifespans and need to be allowed to grow and evolve organically. On the cover of this brochure, which is one of your handouts, there's a tree. This is actually a bristlecone pine tree, which grows in the Great Basin Desert of the state of Nevada and Utah and Eastern California. It's one of the longest lived organisms on the planet, and there are bristlecone pine trees, individual trees, in the high altitude desert of Nevada and California as old as 5,000 to 7,000 years. One tree that has lived all that time. So in a very calculated way, I chose this as the symbol for the Center for Environmental Arts and Humanities, thinking about longevity and permanence and the ongoing energy of this center. At the time, I was thinking very literally that this one program at one university would exist for a very long time. But what I'm now understanding is that the longevity of an idea, such as the idea of a Center for Environmental Arts and Humanities, need not be quite so literal and specific. As I suggested earlier, the ongoing intellectual energy of a program might begin to permeate an entire academic culture and then emerge in particular concrete instances in unexpected places. So when I was doing this, I don't think I had heard of Kapadokya. I don't think I had heard of Mustafa Pasha. I'm sure I hadn't heard of Mustafa Pasha, but this might be true of almost any work that we're doing in utopian studies, in any field. The energy that we're producing might have surprising effects that we can't anticipate. So I just as I couldn't quite realize the ultimate purpose and influence of our center 26 years ago when I started this, I think it may be important to realize that any new center may not quite realize its purpose until after the fact. So we can anticipate, we can hope, we can push in certain directions, but we need to be open to human energy and financial resources and other developments that we can't anticipate, and not merely cling to the vision that we have when we start out. And good things can happen if we're not overly wedded to our expectations. Another point I think that's important to make is that it's really useful to have a good team to support a center. Much of the work for this center came from my own efforts, but I required many graduate students and many faculty colleagues to support what I was doing. And in fact, if you look at these newsletters, these are actually political documents with many graduate students writing the articles. Their first publications were for our newsletter. And if you look at the 1998 issue of our newsletter, which is the earliest one that I have here, there's a profile of a faculty colleague from the art department. And we did a number of these profiles of university colleagues, mostly faculty members from different departments, for not only intellectual purposes, but political purposes, so that they felt invested in our center. And even if they were doing things because of their own sense of purpose, not because I recommended that they do things or that I funded them in any way, we tried to acknowledge and celebrate the work of these various colleagues at the university, partly as a way to enfranchise and bring these people into the work of the center. Not to take credit for their work, but to make them feel connected. It was actually kind of a struggle for me when I was at the University of Nevada. If you look at even at this document that I created, within days of arriving as a new faculty member, and I list many faculty colleagues here, and on this document too, I list a lot of people, but I was constantly struggling to get my colleagues whose work was relevant to the center to feel aligned with and like participants in the center. I think this may be true on many campuses nowadays, unless there's a substantial amount of money and you can pay people to do less teaching or to reassign some of their energy so that they become a fellow or they have some special title and a little bit of salary. This, I guess, could be true for graduate students as well. You could give them a special appointment, and then they feel like, now I have an incentive to put my shoulder into the work of this center. And we never had funding to do that. So all I could give them was moral encouragement. I could tell them, you're doing great work, and can I use your name? And try to, with smoke, with mirrors, with a little bit of magic, create something out of nothing. And so there was a lot of that happening, especially in the early years, um, do, just making the most of the limited resources that we had. Another thing that I would suggest is the importance, and I've discussed this a little bit, I think, with Sinan and with Serpil Opperman, my longtime friend and colleague, who's closely affiliated with the center here, the importance of imagining a path of succession for future leaders and directors to come on board into my role. So my position as director of this center was kind of defined by my contract, and it was a little bit difficult for me to bring in an associate director who had no funding and not necessarily any expectation of later becoming the director. Before I moved to the University of Nevada, I was a professor at Texas State University, and I worked closely with the Center for the Study of the Southwest. It was a regional studies center, interdisciplinary center, and I learned quite a bit by closely watching the director of that center and by meeting with experts from other regional studies centers, like the Center for Great Plains Studies, the I forget where everyone was coming from, Center for the Study of Southern Culture, University of Mississippi. And we, at one point, we had a large grant to bring in these other center directors and learn from them about the best way to run a center. We had 8 or 10 of these people come. And I remember one well-known, longtime director of the Center for the Study of the Great Plains from the University of Nebraska said, the most important thing you can do as a director of a center is imagine who will follow you or what the process will be for finding someone to carry on when you're ready to do something different. Because unless you have a plan of succession, your center is destined to exist only for however long you have energy to do what you're doing. So the Center for Environmental Arts and Humanities existed for 7 years, but then it was due to institutional administrative maneuverings that we negotiated a new form of existence for the center. At the same time that I helped to create this center, there already was a Center for Environmental Sciences and Engineering, a separate center with a different director. And so we had 2 centers on our campus, one for the sciences and engineering, one for the arts and humanities, and we collaborated on a lot of things. We organized conferences together. The 2 directors met regularly to do some planning together. But we had a new university president around 2001, and that person thought that environmental studies should be integrated, that you shouldn't separate the sciences from the arts or from the humanities, and that we needed an integrated vision of a new kind of center for the environment. And we spent several years as a committee negotiating for what this new entity would look like. In the end, we ended up naming it the Academy for the Environment. And there was a natural period of time. After 6 or 7 years, often faculty members will go on sabbatical. And I was eligible for a sabbatical after 6 years. And I went away in 2001, first to Rice University in Texas, and then to the University of Queensland in Australia. And as I was stepping away from the CEAH, we were transitioning to this new Academy for the Environment. And both of the other centers dissolved into the new Academy, which was responsible for applying for many external grants and supporting faculty researchers who wanted to do that. Also, the Academy was supposed to create an energetic, integrated environmental studies program for undergraduates, which was something we didn't have the time or energy to do in our other centers. So that's related to the evolution of these. I strongly recommend the use of newsletters and or websites as a way of recording and preserving efforts. And I've had a number of conversations with Sinan about this. I often say, maybe in a pestering way, what are you doing to record what you're doing? There are several big meetings, important meetings happening here this week. The UNESCO Bridges online meeting happened yesterday and the day before. An important Turkish-focused a Turkish language conference will be happening based here tomorrow and Friday. But meetings like these are ephemeral. They just disappear into the ether unless you document what happened. It's one thing to have the YouTube recording available, but how many people, if we're honest about it, are going to go and sit down and watch a 4-hour meeting on YouTube, especially next year or 10 years from now? I'm not sure that the lengthy, unedited recordings are going to be that helpful, but a short article summarizing the gist of the meeting and the most important outcomes, like we have in these newsletters, that actually can have an ongoing function in representing what has happened in these early years of a center like this one, or any other kind of center. And I'm thinking not only of environmental humanities centers, but any type of center or institute with a particular focus. It could be an institute for women's studies, or for some particular regional emphasis in any part of Turkey or any other part of the world. And so the idea of documenting, recording, synthesizing the key results of an event, I think is vitally important for the ongoing energy of a center. And like I've been saying maybe too many times, this intellectual energy of a center can continue to bear fruit many, many years later if there's some way of preserving that energy and distributing it, like sending this out in the physical sense, or producing a newsletter that is distributed online, or just putting the newsletter on a website and then pushing it through an internet announcement to people, like our newsletter is available on our website. So you'll notice also immediately when you look at these that I didn't write most of the articles. Most of these are written by students, and I edited them and helped them. I gave the assignments, I suggested the topics, then I worked with the students to help them refine their writing. So these are rather professional articles by mostly graduate students, but sometimes by undergraduates, with a little bit of mentoring. So other people did much of the work, but that helped me to amplify my own ability to cover the things that we were doing. Also, in the little notes that I wrote for each issue, called the Director Rambles, a ramble means to go for a walk, but it also means to talk on and on and on, like I'm doing right now. So that was the title of my director's contributions to each of the newsletters. But I actually sometimes engaged serious topics, like what is interdisciplinarity? This first one from 1998 has a mini essay from me on the concept of interdisciplinarity, which was so crucial to our center, to bring together people from different fields. And a field like environmental humanities, which we were talking about in the mid-1990s, is fundamentally a collaborative and interactive enterprise involving people who may have different forms of training and different vocabularies. And especially back then, a quarter century ago, a lot of these people didn't necessarily understand how to work together, how to learn from each other and pull new terminology, new methodologies for research and teaching from other similar fields. So I used this short note as an opportunity to actually provide a bit of, not teaching exactly, but it was a mentoring moment for anyone who might read this, for students, for colleagues, for the general public, about the very nature of interdisciplinarity, which is intrinsic to this field. So this is more than simply a matter of documenting activities. It can also be a fairly significant intellectual exercise. One last thing, the idea of relationship between a center and teaching programs. At the University of Nevada, Reno, from 1996 to 2012, we had what were thought to be the world's leading MA and PhD programs in literature and environment. At any one time, we had between 20 and 30 graduate students, and we had 4 to 7 faculty members specializing in literature and environment as part of the faculty team. We produced dozens and dozens of doctoral graduates, PhD graduates in literature and environment, and a lot of these people are in prominent roles right now. The president of ASLI Japan, a senior professor at one of the major universities in Tokyo, was one of my first PhD students at the University of Nevada, Reno. Her name is Yuki Masami. And other graduates of the program are leading scholars in the field in Italy and various other countries and all throughout the United States. So we produced seeds of the field, and we distributed these through our graduate program that was closely affiliated with the center. And a lot of the articles in these newsletters were written by graduate students. Many of their first publications, as I said before, came for the center's publications, newsletters, and I think these helped to launch them in their career. One of the co-editors of the journal Isle is a graduate of the PhD program at Nevada, who's now a professor in North Carolina. Her name is Jen Westerman. This seems to be the theme of this presentation, that you do everything possible to accomplish important work in the present, given the resources that you have, the staff people, the faculty people, the physical space, the financial resources of your institution. But you can't predict the future or the longevity of the program or center you've created. You just try to squeeze the most that you can out of what you have and whatever energy you personally have and your colleagues can provide. Maybe at this point I can pause and just see if you have any responses to what I've said so far, any questions or comments or something related to a center that you may be associated with, those of you in the room, and I think we also have a YouTube feed, so there may be some people elsewhere who would like to contribute. Why don't we have a conversation for a little while, and then, if you wish, we can turn and look at some of these historical documents and see examples of what we were doing then, even to consider what the parameters of the environmental humanities might have been, what fields are represented, and does the field of the environmental arts and humanities then look anything like what we know it to be now? That could be an interesting exercise. So with that, let me pause and invite anyone who's interested to raise a hand and ask a question or make a comment, or Sinan, I believe you're keeping track of the online activity.
Hi, Scott. It's been a pleasure for all these seminars that I also tried to attend online. And we have been questioning the role of any environmental humanities critic or scholar so far. Personally, I have been struggling with the idea of the public intellectual myself, but this talk gives gives another side to this question, to act through an institution. And I'm part of this Environmental Humanities Center too, and I'm trying my best to be the part of the journal as well. And as an old school person, I really like seeing those brochures and booklets, newsletter as well. But I'm having a problem with the idea of this new virtual side of promotion, of publishing and everything. that to have to talk to people through cameras or just publishing something online and trying to get feedback from there. How would you evaluate this shift to the virtual? I think it's radically changed most of things. Sometimes it made it easier for us to reach people, but still I'm having some problems to adapt to that. What would be our strategies, both as an institution and also personally as a scholar? How would we cope with that? Is my question.
That's a great question. Maybe that is the question that all of us are asking right now. And I don't know that there's a single answer, or certainly not a final answer. I'd be interested to hear what other people think about this as well. But I think about this question every day. And what I imagine is that, we've been propelled into the brave new world of Zoom this past year and a half. And we quickly scrambled and tried to figure it out and do the best we can. I think we will retract a little bit. And we will, most of us, depending on the situation with the pandemic, wherever we're located, will probably settle back to some extent into our previous lives and have some of our meetings face to face and not virtual. But I'm actually hoping that we will continue to have a virtual component even in future classes. And because I think it opens up special opportunities to work with people from afar. I love having diverse mixed groups in my classes, and for many years at the University of Nevada and for the past 9 years at the University of Idaho, I've hosted nearly 100 visiting international researchers who come there and do their work and meet with me individually and attend my seminars in person. But more recently people have been sitting in on my classes virtually. And I think we can continue to do that in the future if we can use technology effectively and have some people in the room and other people beaming in and following from afar. So we now know that we have the technological systems to do that, so we aren't strictly limited by geography. You might ask why I'm actually here in the room and not doing this from Idaho, and the reality is I just, like everybody else, really wanted to get out and see people face to face and be in a different location. And I was just curious to see what travel meant in the year 2021. But I also realized I could be sitting in my home and doing all of these things virtually. But there's probably a certain bit of excitement for everyone here because we're in the room together, and it must feel as strange for you as it does for me to have this just a different level of community, a different kind of sense of community when you're more or less in the same room. Let's hope this is not a super spreader event. We're all being careful. But as far as publications go, virtual publications, you can tell me if you've had a different experience, but I have found that I've adapted pretty well to doing my research using electronic materials. I don't really like getting physical journals anymore. I've accumulated too many physical paper journals and books, and my wife is telling me, can you please clear out your library? It's overflowing with materials, and you don't even have room on the shelves anymore. So I actually like to collect materials I'm working on my machine. Whenever I'm doing evaluations of manuscripts or tenure and promotion materials, I always say, don't send me anything physical. Just send me an attachment and I'll deal with it that way. So I've adapted to reading almost everything on screen. And I don't know, many people, at least especially in the early years of electronic books and journals, people would argue for tangibility, they'd say, but the feel of the book, I miss the feel of the paper. And I confess to having uttered sentences like that in the past as well. But at this point, I don't really feel so wedded to the paper. It feels really quaint to hold paper newsletters. But mostly I think we've made that transition. I remember walking through Volcanoes National Park in Hawaii in 1996, I think it was, with a group of eco-critics and environmental writers. Linda Hogan, the Native American writer. David Quammen was there, the famous science journalist who has written not long ago about zoonotic diseases in his impressive book called Spillover. And David Quammen stopped all of us in the middle of the volcanoes and said, I will never publish virtually, I will never publish electronically. There's no way to control copyright, and everybody will steal my work. And we had a large debate in the middle of the hiking path with Quammen and others. And now I think, wow, we just really didn't understand anything back then. We didn't know that you can evaluate manuscripts, you can protect people's intellectual property, you can do a lot of things, and I think also have a lighter ecological footprint, use less paper and less physical shipping if you do things electronically. So there's a lot to be gained by digital technology in various ways, and I'm sure we'll discover many new things in the coming years. The pandemic, despite the hardship, despite the suffering, has actually propelled our understanding of communication technology forward in impressive ways. And I think, if I may be so bold, India, the country, has been one of the leaders in making the most of digital technology for meetings to organize dozens and dozens of conferences and lecture series that never would have happened pre-pandemic and pre-Zoom in a way. Although I kind of have the sense that Kapadokya University is following closely, on the heels of India, especially Emra sitting here, who's organized 35 visiting lectures this year, which I think must be some kind of record, and is another example of the wonders of using this technology to bring in visiting speakers. Again, this might not have occurred prior to the pandemic. So we're all trying to figure it out, but I am hopeful that good things will come of these new technologies, and yet we should try to remember that we're still human beings, and that we are not evolving as quickly as our technologies. And so we don't want the technology to control us and overwhelm what we need as people, which is some degree of interaction. Do any of the rest of you have thoughts about the use of technologies and the way to balance the earlier modes with what we're trying to do right now? Sinan, do you have some thoughts about this?
Yeah, I think that last keyword you just used was what I was thinking of, balance. That's maybe more than any other people, maybe except for the biologists, we do know and understand that it's all about adapting. Environmental studies or environment itself, nature itself is about adapting. And we have adapted. I mean, you just mentioned about your role in the journal Ecoscene. Excuse me, maybe is this better? Yusha. I mean, she's one of our managing editors of the journal. I mean, you're doing a great job, and that's an online electronic journal. I think you have adapted. I know what you mean, of course. I agree with Scott when he says that this is a question perhaps we all have these days. But we will adapt and we will balance, because the world is changing and it will continue to change. And I think we're doing okay. Like, I didn't know it was 35 already. I was gonna ask at some point, but yeah.
It was 35 yesterday morning.
Okay.
Now it's 36 right now.
All right. And Scott, if I may, and just move here as a question to you, because I know there are some colleagues among us who have been interested in starting like similar environmental humanities centers in their own institutions. And when it comes to that, well, here in Kapadokya University, we are lucky because we didn't even really need to ask. We have all the support and more than that we need for the environmental humanities flourishing here. As you were saying, not only in the institutional body of a center, but also in our programs, undergraduate and graduate, and then with the environmental humanities series in the university press. But then, so we don't really, we really have not had real challenges with universities, leadership, or administration. On the contrary, but then other people do. And would you have any suggestions for the situation based on your own experience? Any strategies to approach and maybe persuade leadership or funding sources or decision makers in which these centers would operate? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. So a lot of the work of our older center really was dependent on financial resources that were available, and so in the case of our center, this existed as part of a hiring negotiation when the University of Nevada trying to hire me and one other colleague, Mike Branch, who became a later president of ASLE and a very prominent scholar of 19th century American literature. Now he's a prominent nature writer himself, writing about the desert and things like that. They were trying to hire us, and they said, if you come here, we'll create a center for you, and we'll give you a bit of money to do things. So sometimes when you're bringing new faculty members aboard, a hiring process actually is an opportunity to get leverage with the institution, and the other way around, for an institution to nudge people to join the faculty by saying, we will create something that you will have a role in shaping. But as you were saying earlier, Sinan, the idea of doing a variety of things at the same time, to have public events, conferences, to have a journal, to have academic programs for students, and a publishing series. We had a publishing series, or we created one, called the Environmental Arts and Humanities Series, University of Nevada Press. So this is, one of my jobs as a younger faculty member was to go around the university and negotiate with various people, the director of the press and others, to create these separate programs that would all come together under the umbrella of the center. So it's a chance to create a sense of cooperation across the campus. And I think we did quite a bit. We really created a great sense of activity on our campus. But to be honest, and this is a workshop, it's not simply a polished presentation. To be honest, I always felt as if it was a bit of a struggle to hold it all together and to encourage people to be fully enthusiastic about this work. And it's one of the reasons why, when an opportunity arose for me to move to another university and relieve myself of all the stress, I said, I've been doing this for a long time. We've had some successes, but now I'm ready to move on to other things. So I think you need to pay attention to your own kind of enthusiasm and what you feel ready to keep doing, and not just assume that you march forward forever doing things the same way when you feel personally you're ready for a change. I was going to say something else. I can't quite remember what it was, but as far as whether or not, one question is whether or not a university should create a center. Is it really necessary? Or can you simply have academic programs in departments and faculty members doing their own thing? And to me, that's a wide open question. I think centers are useful, especially for a nascent field, a brand new field, because a name raises visibility, like the phrase environmental humanities or environmental arts and humanities. This may have helped to generate an awareness of that phrasing, that name for a field. So and the same thing goes for naming a degree program. Rather than simply having a degree in English, we had a degree in literature and environment, which helped to support the common recognition of the term literature and environment. So names can be useful in that way. But one of the problems of creating a named program is that it seems to create a subculture, a smaller community that is somewhat in isolation from the larger community of students and faculty members. And we actually ran into problems at the University of Nevada with that, where our other colleagues were jealous of us. And they said, "You think you're so special, right? You think you're better than everyone else because you publish more articles and books, and you attract." We were attracting top level PhD students who could have gone to any graduate program in English in the United States, and they were saying, "No, we don't want to go to Harvard. We want to go to Nevada because that's where they do literature and environment." And our colleagues, rather than being happy, they were becoming jealous, and they were, really, because human beings are human beings. Anywhere, even in beautiful places like Reno, Nevada, in the middle of the desert and the mountains, and in Mustafa Pasha, human beings are human beings. And so you need to be very careful to kind of manage the relationships among faculty colleagues. And that was one of the struggles that we had. And one reason why it was a relief when two of us, my colleague Erin James, who's an eco-narratologist and a wonderful younger eco-critic, Canadian originally, but we hired her at Nevada. And then she and I both moved to Idaho at the same time in 2012. And at that point, the writing was on the wall, and the people at Nevada realized, oh, we're not going to be able to keep this program going because Scott and Erin have left. But Erin and I think, were relieved to get out of the political pressure cooker of Nevada, where we just felt so much stress because our faculty colleagues were feeling jealous and not really supportive of what we had accomplished, even though we had a famous program. So just be aware that people are people. And at Idaho, we've resisted all efforts to create a named program. We have a concentration of several faculty members doing high-level eco-critical work. And sometimes people say, shouldn't we create a program in eco-criticism so that students will know that we're here and they'll come seek us out? And Erin and I always say, no, let's not name the program, because then we'll be separated from the rest of our faculty community. So it can be a disadvantage too. And I would just offer that as a warning about this as well. If there were a major donor, I don't know if this is how things work in Turkey or in other countries. In the United States, we rely heavily on private donors, whether it's a state university or a private university. That's why I created this brochure. I wanted a private donor. I wanted a rich person or company to say, what you're doing is really special. I'm going to give you $10 million. I would like you to build a building with my name on it. And I would like you to create special named professorships named after me. And then you will have the money to do really amazing things. And I just never felt as if our development office, which is the fundraising office at the university, was fully behind our effort and put me in touch with donors who would say, yeah, I'm worth hundreds of millions of dollars. Of course I can give you 5 or 10 million and see what you can do with it. No one ever did that. And I think other universities are more successful in raising that money. So I guess one of the reasons why I wanted to do this is that I was hopeful we would get a special gift from a wealthy person or a company that would enable us to power forward, and maybe with enough money it would buy out some of my time, and I would have more energy to just do this as my full-time job. All of this work, this was an extra overload. And I know you're very familiar with doing multiple jobs, but when you start to do it for 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, then you begin to question, do I really want to do 3 jobs at once? Or how would it be only to have one job and to do it really well? So without that special gift of money, and I hate to be crass and practical about it, but money, certainly at American universities, goes a long way toward freeing people up to do important work, and also it buys friends. Like I said earlier, I could have created faculty fellow positions and graduate fellow positions for people to work within the center and be relieved of some of their other responsibilities, and then they would have had very positive thoughts about the center as something that supported them. I think this happens at other universities through their programs, through their centers, which are better funded than this one was. We had a shoestring budget, a tiny budget, and we did a huge amount with that budget, but we never had quite enough to pay for the release time that we really needed to make this a permanent organization. So I think what my purpose here is to be not only a cheerleader and say this is a really great new center here in Kapadokya, but also to be honest and say these are some of the struggles that I lived with and that may happen to arise here or anywhere else. And it's just good to be aware of that and to predict that and move around, or just to be realistic about what we can accomplish. Other topics are completely different. Yes,
Yeah, Scott.
Oh yeah.
Thank you very much for being honest and then giving us all these heads up for possible challenges, and very much appreciated. We actually have one comment and one question from Ahmet Özkan through YouTube Live. This will take us back to the previous topic though, like the virtual reality. Ahmet says, during the last half and a year, we are all forced because of the pandemic to stay inside. Despite that, environmental studies have not stopped flourishing. This is his comment. And he has a question. Do you think from now on we will be techno-environmentalists? In such a technological world, do you think it's easier to create awareness through social media or any means of technology in hand?
Yeah, thanks, Ahmet. I figured if we had a virtual question today, it would come either from New Delhi or from Lake Van. So thank you, Ahmet. I love that term, techno-environmentalists. I'm gonna make a mental note and use that in the future. I think we have probably been techno-environmentalists for some time. I've relied, for years, editing the journal Isle, I was a techno-environmentalist at using my mobile phone. You read that question off of your phone. I was editing the journal Isle on my phone for many years in airports, waiting to go give lectures here and there. So we've relied heavily on technology, and I think that the challenge is to make the best possible use of technology and to understand the limits of technologies, and not to control the technology and not let the technology control us to the extent that we can. So, I mean, if it feels like it's getting out of control and we're spending all of our time on Zoom and never interacting with people or never adjusting our eyes to other things, never stepping outside of our buildings, then it's probably too much. I recently evaluated an environmental studies program at a liberal arts college in Maine, and I worked with evaluation team members from Oberlin College and Middlebury College. And my colleague from Middlebury, who's part of their famous environmental studies program, said that after a day of our meetings evaluating this program and her other meetings, she told her children that she had become a zombie, like a zombie. And I think there's a danger of us becoming zombies and in other ways being overwhelmed and crushed by the technology. So we, again, I return to that idea. Let's control the technology and use it in the best possible ways. And I don't think we've determined what all those ways are. We're discovering them every year, every day. And so I love the fact that this is a hybrid event, because I think this may be the future. So that you're asking me this question about techno-environmentalism through the internet as I sit here with a group of people in person. And that kind of balance, which may be a shifting balance in the future, is what we need to be attentive to. Also, I'm someone who just really loves and derives motivation and actual energy in my life from being outside. I used to love having meetings with my graduate students while hiking or climbing mountains and things like that. And I'm the same way. And in fact, yesterday I spent a lot of time outside with friends who are here at this event, hiking, and then went back and sat at my computer all afternoon and long into the evening. So I feel like I can do my work better if I also spend some time out in the world. And so if I ever became more techno than environmental, then I think that would be the end of my ability to do this work. So a very interesting question. That is something I'll keep in mind in the future. Yeah. Other questions or comments?
Actually, I don't know. Thank you, first of all. When you talked about going public the other day in the seminar, the first group that came to my mind were teenagers and children, actually, because I think they should be the target in this all ecological crisis situation. So, what can these centers do to draw the attention of the younger generation? Actually, this is my question. Thank you.
I think that's another really wonderful question, and I would actually, I'll give you a few thoughts, but then I'll throw that question back to everyone else here and see what you suggest. I think my group hasn't done a great job of reaching out to the younger generation. I think universities would be delighted to see these kinds of centers developing offerings and opportunities for younger generations, encouraging young people to become involved in the work of the university, in the work of the center. First of all, it puts the center on the radar of these younger people who may become students at the university. Like, oh, I'd never heard of Kapadokya University, but wow, there's this really neat activity happening there. I think I'd like to go and study there. So recruitment of students by creating special programs, maybe producing materials like videos or even environmental games that associated with these particular demographics of younger people. Maybe special conferences, convening meetings, congresses of younger people, like a Turkish Youth Environmental Congress happening under the auspices of the Center for the Environment. And again, this Kapadokya University might mainly be the organizers and the platform, but also it would be a way to be recognized as the group hosting this event. What else? Contests, art and writing contests for younger people.
Yeah, I was just going to say.
Are you doing that already?
Our Turkish Language and Literature department for this year is the second year of doing this short story contest.
But maybe
to high school students.
Does it have any kind of environmental aspect?
Yes.
Okay. Well, I would just say keep doing that. And one thing that I was very sensitive to with this other center back at the University of Nevada was trying to do things repeatedly, to create traditions, and hoping that momentum would build as the tradition developed. So not just doing one newsletter, but doing it every single semester for 6 or 7 years, and not just organizing one symposium, but making sure to have a regular symposium in order to create a pattern and a certain sense of expectation in our constituency, on campus and off campus. The same thing would be true of a writing contest for young people. If you're going to do it every year and have a regular time when submissions are due, so that teachers, maybe if the teachers are helping you to reach out to students, the teachers come to expect the deadline, and if you don't reach out to them, they'll contact you and say, where are the materials for this year's contest? Our students are expecting it. So regularity, reliability, keeping to a schedule to some extent. But are there any other suggestions for what might be done to build a constituency with younger people through these kinds of environmental centers? Do you have a suggestion?
I have not ever thought about it, but the first thing that I think now is maybe we can organize some nature walks, maybe in this region especially.
Yeah, and maybe this also makes me think of kind of student clubs at the university level who are oriented toward outings, and find a way to integrate to some degree the academic offerings and the more sort of intellectual activities, like being in a room like this, having a conversation, with outdoor activities, so that the group of students who like to be outdoors may also find that at least some of them also enjoy this kind of experience. And then to find a way to invite the public, quote unquote, the public, to participate as well. And this could include younger people, maybe through the schools, but there may also be residents of the area who are interested in this kind of work. When we did these conferences, we made a special effort to advertise through the newspaper and through other outlets to the general public. And we created a special registration level so that knowing that local citizens weren't necessarily attending a conference because they needed to do so professionally. So we didn't want them to have to pay the regular academic registration fee. So we would have a much lower, more accessible fee for a conference, but also for outings, for nature walks, maybe invite members of the local community to participate if that feels appropriate. And again, this is another point I wanted to make. For centers, for degree programs, for any kind of activity, even for going public, do what feels appropriate for the cultural context. And in the United States, there's considerable concern about security for students and for other kinds of work that we do at the university. And the worries about security, I think, have only increased in recent decades. So that would be our concern probably in the American context, not to put anybody at risk by just broadcasting what we're going to do, and having a mixture of people who are unknown, some of them unknown, joining a nature walk or some other kind of activity. It's terrible to have to worry about this, but even in the technological context, we have passcodes for Zoom meetings, and I know some people who've been Zoom bombed. People have disrupted PhD thesis defenses and things like that. So we just have to be sensitive to that kind of practical security issue. At the same time, the more idealistic part of me suggests that if we're organizing nature walks under the auspices of a center, it would be nice to cast a wide net and invite a diverse group of people who would benefit from knowing each other and who could become supporters of each other in different ways. There may be members of the local community who could help to support the university in certain ways if they felt invited to do that. I've been on campuses where some people didn't even know the university was there. They just thought it was a park. And they never had occasion, like, what's that? Why is that big green space there with all those buildings? They, you know, I have no reason to go there. I can't go grocery shopping there. And I have no other purpose because they were never invited onto the campus. American universities tend to be separate like that. And I always thought that was a kind of a tragedy because that's how we create a separation between the town and the gown, as we call it in the US. And yet, I think part of my motivation in doing any of this work is to reach out from the campus with ideas and to gather ideas from communities that might energize my work on campus. So, other topics, other questions or comments?
First, I want to say something about the issue we're just discussing. We're now starting a student club in collaboration with Roots and Shoes Association in Turkey, but it's an international association founded by Jane Goodall. So in our first meeting with the directors and the members of the association in Turkey and our students, we just realized that our students have they are frustrated by the violation of animal rights, but we didn't know that they have this sense. I mean, we didn't know about what they think about this beforehand. So we just organized an online meeting and asked every student to join it, and then the directors of the association asked what they think, what they care about, and what they want to do, without any fixed agenda. So the first thing she did was to ask what they think, not asking specific questions, but a very general one. And then we just realized that we need to do something about animal rights in Turkey because the youngsters see the problem there. So that's a contribution to the discussion. But I have another question for you, in fact. Now in Turkey, it's like only the people of English departments are interested in these issues. So while you were establishing the center just at the beginning, to what extent did you succeed in making it an interdisciplinary institution? We have now problems about it.
Yeah, so first of all, regarding the student organization and the notion of asking members or potential members what they're interested in, I think that's a very good approach. I think you want to know where people are coming from and why they're joining the group and what they want to talk about, what kinds of activities they want to do. So I think it's a good idea for the organizers to have a certain vision and not simply a blank slate and say, we don't know what we're doing, please tell us what you want to do. You want to have a certain momentum or a certain vision, but you can balance that with suggestions from the people who join the group. So I think the idea of doing some work with a student organization devoted to animal issues and animal rights makes a great deal of sense to me. And I mean, that's one of many very important topics. And I know animal rights is particularly motivating for many people. So it's one of those especially emotionally loaded aspects of the environment that people care deeply about. So it's actually a great way of attracting members of the community to get involved. Let's see, Nurtan, what was the second part of your comment?
The question or the
The question, the question. Yeah.
I asked
Other departments.
Other departments.
Interdisciplinary.
Other departments.
Yeah.
Well, it's a conundrum. It's a challenge. To be honest, this center, if you read the documents, it looks wildly interdisciplinary because I went out of my way to avoid emphasizing literature because the center of gravity of this center actually was the English department, and our program in literature and environment, which was very large, 20 to 30 PhD students at a time, and between 4 and 7 graduate student or faculty members. So we were the center of gravity, and we, in these years when we were doing the center, we were quite well known around the world in literature and environment. And yet I tried to create the image of complete interdisciplinarity, emphasizing art, emphasizing multicultural studies, emphasizing history. I mean, I never put literature on the front page. I always, tried to reach out to biologists and anthropologists and artists and other people, attempting to create the appearance of full interdisciplinarity, specifically to avoid the accusation that the entire center was really a secret agenda for the English department to conquer the university. So it's a constant worry. It was for me. It was a little bit stressful to avoid having a hub of activity in only one department, when I truly, in my heart, believe in full interdisciplinarity and a diversity of voices. I created an advisory board with no one else from the English department except me, and then colleagues from many other departments, and had meetings with them regularly, and was constantly asking my advisory board of faculty colleagues, tell me what you would like me to do. Tell me how I can help you. And they didn't give me many suggestions, so I had to come up with ideas of my own to represent interdisciplinarity from our campus and from elsewhere in the field. And then these same colleagues often complained to me, as if they didn't read the newsletters. We were doing tremendous interdisciplinarity, but they often did tell me, why are you overemphasizing literature? And I felt as if there was a lot of pressure from people who wanted to be critical. So again, I mean, it sounds like I'm being quite negative, but I'm talking about the actual history of this center, which is the grandfather, grandmother, grandparent of today's environmental centers, and the struggles that we had. And it's one of the reasons why, I didn't just stay at one university to retire, because it just became politically challenging, and I wanted to go to a place where I could take a deep breath and relax and feel as if there wasn't so much envy, center envy, you could call it. So I would just say, Noten, it's good to be aware of this possibility that other colleagues from other fields might at some point say, you're getting too much attention, you're getting too much money, you're getting all the new faculty members are going in this direction. And to be aware that people are people everywhere you go. And they may have their own agendas, they may have their own insecurities, and their reasons for not welcoming and celebrating good things that you're doing or trying to do.
Sorry, Scott, if I may, as a follow-up on that, I think we all agree on the necessity and the power of interdisciplinarity. I don't think we have any questions about that. But then I think all it takes is like patience. We take baby steps. Mm-hmm. So this conference that will start tomorrow, this 2-day conference, is the first national, as you were saying, like we try to deliberately keep it on the national level so that all these new ideas are disseminated into the repertoire of other colleagues from other departments who have not been following these, maybe also because of language barriers. But we will have speakers from architecture, anthropology, archaeology. I think that's like if these, if you'll excuse the analogy, if all of these fields are different animals, today we will all be meeting in this common grazing ground, and then and we'll start from
I
there.
want to see how far you can go with the metaphor.
I don't know. Well, yeah, yeah. We try. We take baby steps,
Yeah.
and then.
To me, this doesn't seem like a baby step. This seems like a big step to organize that kind of conference. And also, the thing about virtual conferences, this will be a virtual conference.
Yes.
And you can accomplish a lot through virtual conferences. And I know there are some special new platforms for conferences that allow hallway conversations. But I haven't ever participated. I know there have been like chat rooms and things.
Yeah, I know what
but,
you mean. Yeah.
But I'm doubtful that a virtual hallway conversation would be the same as actually meeting someone out in the hall and randomly bumping into them and finding a point of connection.
Yeah, like an on-conference session or something.
Right.
Yeah, all right. Yeah, but then we do promise that an edited collection will come out of that, Scott. I mean, it will not be just the conference and then that. So we'll keep records of that and then put that into writing. One question, again, arriving through the YouTube. Ina Sukenko.
From Finland, from Ukraine and Finland.
Okay, says, Dear Scott, what do you think about the ways for environmental humanities centers to keep the balance between covering local environmental problems and being involved in researching issues of global environmental agenda?
Thank you, Ina. Yeah, that's another great question. And I think it actually doesn't have to be an absolute balance. I think all spatial scales should be considered, and it's a good thing for anyone associated with these centers to do the kind of work that they care about. I do, when we established the Center for Environmental Arts and Humanities, we were at a state public university in a particular part of the world, the high desert, the Great Basin Desert of northwestern Montana, and where there are many serious and fascinating environmental issues related to the use of public land, the expansion or sprawl of cities, mining, and the extraction of resources such as gold. Nevada produces more gold than all but 3 countries in the world. Wildlife protection, many issues that were local. And so I tried to create a lot of occasions at this center to have panels of local citizens, even sometimes panels from the regional government, the local government, where I would invite them in to interact with the academics, so it wouldn't just be at a formal public meeting discussing policy, but actually an intellectual exchange between government officials or corporate officials, various people. So I loved the idea at that time of organizing a lot of events that would be very regionally focused. At the same time, if you look at the list of activities, the research projects, in this brochure, the Center for Environmental Arts and Humanities, with the pine tree, bristletone pine tree on the cover, recent faculty projects include a study of the sociology of garbage, garbology. That's not regionally specific. Research on African national parks and their effects on nearby communities. That's not very local in the state of Nevada in the American West. The Nevada Biodiversity Initiative, that's regional. Ethnobiology and studies of traditional landscape perception among the Paiute and Shoshone peoples of the Great Basin, that's local. So it's a whole mixture of local and non-local topics, research projects by individual faculty members. And essentially what I was trying to broadcast through this list is a sense of the diversity from very local to completely non-local, and sometimes to rather abstract or theoretical topics that aren't specifically place-based at all. So my philosophy would be to cover the whole range, depending on who the people are who are associated with with the center and what they want to pursue in their own work. But ideally to have at least a mixture, if not an absolute balance between local and non-local. So yeah, good question. I think you had another question or comment.
It was just a follow-up to what Nurten has said. She said the field is a little restricted to English department. Actually, in all of the Turkish universities in this country, we have a Turkish language and literature department. But there is this language barrier. I think as one of the things that these centers can do, we can list translation. Yeah. So that we can make this field accessible to the other colleagues.
I think that's a great suggestion, and language barrier inhibits interdisciplinarity because we speak different languages in different disciplines, but then we also speak different regional or national or cultural languages, which is what I think you're talking about specifically. And I agree with you completely that can restrict language, as in Turkish and English, can restrict who has access to particular types of activities and academic programs. And so translation in the sense of publications is very important. Most people who talk about translation, in my experience, are talking about book-length translation, but in a lot of disciplines, articles are the major type of publication that are appearing. So I wonder if there's a reasonable way to throw some energy into translating articles. That might help colleagues outside of literary studies who are interested in reading articles from other parts of the world in their fields to have access to those. So that might be something to do. But also translation is very important in conferences. And who has the ability to participate in the conference can depend on what language is being used. Obviously, we're using English. We're in Turkey. I'm sitting in Turkey, but I'm speaking English. And so there may be people who are interested in the topics that we're discussing, but don't feel comfortable participating in a meeting in English, and that's a problem. Simultaneous or consecutive translation at meetings or at lectures can be pretty expensive. So if there's the possibility of raising funding to support activities of a center or of a university in a specific field like environmental humanities, to put some of that funding into the support for translation at meetings could be really valuable. One of the places I've seen that's done the best job for this is Japan, and they often rely on corporate funding. So I've attended conferences in Japan where companies like wristwatches and things like that, or automobile companies have provided large donations to pay for translators so that you could have speakers using several different languages and attendees wearing headphones. I mean, very high level, like the United Nations, but for environmental humanities. So I think translation is just a really important subject. I'm glad you brought it up. And one of the issues would be resources, money, to pay for adequate translations. We've already been talking quite a bit about book translations, and it's a great thing that the center here is launching a book series that presumably will include a mixture of works written in Turkish originally and works that are translated from overseas. The Association for the Study of Literature and Environment, ASLE, also has a subvention fund for translation, and I'm not quite sure what kind of projects are supported for that, and whether it supports translation from other languages into English primarily, or the other way.
They do both.
They do both.
Yeah, I'm about to prepare a proposal for that.
Wonderful. To go which way? From English?
English to Turkish.
Yeah. Yeah, so that's an example of a fund that's available. I don't know how much money. I wish it were more money that were available for that. But I think many of us recognize this as a really important obstacle and opportunity to international exchange in the field. So, thank you. Other topics, other questions or comments, or do you want to go back to something we've been talking about?
Sorry, and Scott, since you mentioned it, I have to also add that, like in the environmental humanities series of our university press, publishing Turkish translations of works is somewhat our priority, but we also publish. It's on our agenda to publish books in English in the original as well. So, I mean, I might
to publish them in English.
Yes,
oh.
Yes, and I might as well use this opportunity as a, as an invitation to, send proposals to our university press, environmental humanities series.
Do you have that?
Yeah, there's a website for those who are interested. If you send an email to us, I would be happy to. And Nurten is also with the university press. I would be very happy to, provide detail.
That's interesting. I've looked at the website, but I didn't see a button on the homepage to this. Web design is very complicated art, and it's hard to know what to. You want everything on the homepage, but you can't fit everything on the homepage. How do you what kinds of buttons do you have there that will guide people most efficiently to what you think is especially important? So, if you think there's a certain amount of international traffic on the website for the center, then and you're really trying to promote this English language publishing opportunity in addition to the translation series, then I think you should have some kind of highly visible button.
Yes.
Right on that first page.
Okay, very good. Yeah, thank you very much for this.
Not that I'm an expert on web design, but I look at a lot of websites.
It makes perfect sense. It makes perfect sense to do that.
And especially
it's just been developing the English pages of the university press have been completed very recently, but then honestly, I have not thought of this yet. But thank you very much. We'll make it happen.
Well, and also, some of them, I've helped to create a website in my own field that I think I've mentioned it in my previous seminars here, the Arithmetic of Compassion website. And there's a rotating homepage where you have different images and different aspects of the website are highlighted. So that's one way of amplifying the space on the homepage. If you can have only so much on the screen at one time, then you can have it moving slowly through different elements. So you might just have a page devoted to the book series and the published the press, university press.
Yes.
So, so we have about 20 minutes, and I wonder if there's anything that anyone in the room or elsewhere would like to talk about that we haven't yet covered, related to centers, institutes, programs, or the field of the environmental humanities more generally. Maybe even going back to the topics of our previous sessions in recent weeks, or just more broadly, perhaps things that I didn't touch upon in any of my other talks.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Scott. What do you think about collaboration with non-academic bodies? So how should we include, non-academia into academic organizations such as the center? And I was also wondering, what kind of internship possibilities, do these centers offer undergraduate or undergraduate levels? Thank you.
I'm so glad you mentioned these ideas, which haven't really come up at all in our previous discussions, but I'm keenly interested in what you're saying. A big part of my life right now, professionally, is research administration. I'm the associate director of an organization for highly integrative, basic and responsive research, meaning integrative, bringing together disciplines, bringing together academic and non-academic colleagues, and both basic, fundamental research and societally responsive research. Sometimes we refer to this in the US as public impact focused research. So I was part of a national team in the past few years to produce a big report on public impact focused research. And now I work with this other organization. I'll be at 11 o'clock tonight, I'll be on a Zoom call here in Turkey with colleagues back in the US for the HIBAR, Highly Integrated Basic and Responsive Research Alliance, which is an alliance of major research universities in the US. In other fields, in many technical fields, it seems much more common for there to be cooperation between academic researchers and people in society, in companies or NGOs or other kinds of groups, and sometimes in government. For instance, I run a webinar series for this organization, among other things, and we had a chemistry professor from the University of British Columbia lecture on his research related to illegal logging, cutting down of trees, and he uses a chemical technique to determine precisely where the wood came from particular trees. It's called forensic chemistry, as in, if you find a person has been murdered, you do forensic study to determine what's going on. In forensic chemistry, you can determine the chemical components of trees and whether they were legally or illegally harvested. And this academic researcher doing cutting-edge chemistry cooperates with law enforcement and government officials developing policy all around the world. So that's an example of this kind of high-bar research. But it's harder in the humanities to think of examples, because normally we do our research by ourselves, or with maybe a few colleagues writing an article or editing a book or something like that. So I had a meeting yesterday afternoon with a senior official from a national research funding organization based in New York, specifically about wanting this organization would like to provide funding for this type of collaboration in the humanities. And we were brainstorming in our call yesterday about what kinds of collaborations could exist. Like, how can researchers in the environmental humanities work with public policy developers to use our research to maybe how to inspire politicians to develop better ecological policies of various kinds. How would a collaboration reinforce the effectiveness of these policy development processes? And so I'm actively looking for examples of these collaborations. And if you know of any collaborations in Turkey, I would love to talk to people who are doing that kind of work and maybe organize a webinar on that subject. Like, how did this project develop? A few years ago, I was at a meeting at the Rachel Carson Center in Munich, and one of the participants was a interdisciplinary environmental humanities scholar from the University of Miami in Florida, whose work involved some of these collaborations with people from national parks in the United States and around the world, developing, public education resources, so that visiting the national park was not just a hiking opportunity, but a learning opportunity. And so this was a kind of collaboration between an academic researcher and her team, and people who were working in a more hands-on, practical way in national parks. So that's one example that comes to mind. And Emra, what was the second part of it?
Internship possibilities.
Oh, internships.
Yeah. Sorry, may I add? I mean, that's just the internship, but then maybe you can answer both of these together for the sake of time. I was wondering, what is the international student quotas, and very briefly the policies of your institution, Scott, because our MA degree program here and also partly the undergraduate program are with some kind of orientation in the environmental humanities and eco-criticism, and we would like to we keep encouraging our students to improve themselves and then maybe seek degrees in the US at the MA level, at the doctoral level. So if you can say a few things about that as well, together with the internship issue.
Okay, I'll try to discuss internships briefly, and if I forget the international student question, just remind me.
Yeah.
I love the idea of internships. The question that often arises is whether they're salaried and people get pay, or whether they get credit. How do you reward the interns? And I would say that all of the people writing for our newsletters and organizing panels, they were technically interns. They were getting professional experience, although we didn't necessarily call them interns. The danger with an informal internship program, is that you rely on unpaid labor. And so you want to avoid exploiting people. You can make yourself, as a faculty member or a center director, feel like you're doing something legitimate by saying, you need to do this to understand what you might want to do when you graduate, or to put a line on your CV so that you can get a job. But the danger is that we're not compensating people. So just keep that in mind, I would say. But it's much easier to offer degree credit so that students can work toward their completion of their program than it is to come up with resources to pay them. And sometimes there are actually rules preventing paying people if they already have another job at the university to pay them additionally. So there are certain bureaucratic, administrative complications, but essentially I was talking about interns earlier when I was saying much of the work of the center happens through student activities, student energy, student expertise, and it just becomes a matter of training them and mentoring them. I think another way of not exploiting student interns is to commit oneself to actively supervising and providing feedback and guidance, instead of just saying, here's a job, go do it, and then give me the finished product. That's not very active mentorship. So it can be rewarding and meaningful for student interns if you continue to be present and support them. As far as students from various parts of the world traveling either specifically to the United States or moving around from country to country, I am a tremendous supporter of that. I deeply believe in the value on many levels of visiting other countries, studying in other countries. I spent a year in Germany as a PhD student, working in the environmental humanities. My first Fulbright was to go to the University of Bonn for a year and study the work of Alexander von Humboldt, the traveler. I worked with the Humboldt biographer in the geography department at the University of Bonn, and also took courses in nature poetry and many other comparative literature, travel literature at the university. Profoundly meaningful experience for me. And I've hosted many degree-seeking students and temporary students and many colleagues at the various universities where I've worked, and it's become one of the most important parts of my work. Siskin is my colleague from Izmir and spent a year and a half recently in the University of Idaho working on research projects and attending seminars and working with colleagues like Sezgin and a lot of other Turkish colleagues. And Serpil Okerman, the director of this center, came on a Fulbright for half a year and worked with me at Nevada and many others. So I am a deep supporter of that kind of work. As far as quotas regarding international students in American degree programs, I'm not actually aware of any formal quotas. I actually think they would be illegal. You could not have such a quota. It would be discriminating against certain groups of people. So there may be informal, unspoken kinds of ideas, like if a degree program started to be heavily populated by people from not just another country or other countries, but even from one other American university. Like, we can't admit everyone from that same university. We need a certain diversity in our student community. There might be some screening on that basis, but there are no formal limitations. In fact, in some fields like chemical engineering, American graduate programs would disappear if there were not graduate students from other countries. Most of the PhD programs in some of these fields actually come from overseas. So in the humanities, the challenge, I think, would be language ability in an English department. But we also, in looking at applicants, would, I think, recognize the value of training students from another country who would then become ambassadors for the program and for the field if they came in and developed more expertise. So for years we had a pipeline from Japan to our program at Nevada. So I mentored a number of really wonderful students from Japan, and now through programs like Fulbright, have regularly over the years hosted both at Nevada and at Idaho PhD students from many different countries: India, China, Turkey, and so I guess the question is also funding.
Okay.
If people can go through Fulbright or Tubitak or other programs and get financial support, the main way that we fund students in the humanities in graduate programs is through teaching assistantships. So you need a pretty high level of language ability and some comfort with the American academic system to be able to walk right in and begin teaching American undergraduates in literature or in writing. And that's a pretty high standard. I have had students from Japan who were funded by Japan for their master's program, and then they stayed to earn a PhD, and by the time they had lived in the US for a couple of years, they were ready to actually begin teaching. So you can transition into that level of support. But the main obstacle probably would be the funding obstacle, unless one were self-funded.
Okay.
So we have about 5 minutes to go. I wonder if there are any last lingering comments or questions.
Well, as a flashback to your earlier seminars, in fact, I wonder, can we collaborate with activist organizations as environmental humanities centers? Because I know that in Turkey, most of the academics avoid to collaborate with these organizations because most of the non-governmental organizations who are environmentalists at the same time are leftist. Even though they do not publicize it, you can feel it. And we mostly avoid to be affiliated just because of that. Even they have the same political ideas, we just avoid because of their political stands. So I don't know how the situation is in the US or in other countries.
That's a really interesting question. My basic, even though I consider myself an environmentalist and a sort of a supporter of progressive social causes in general, as an academic, it has always been my goal to support critical thinking and the exchange of ideas, rather than to advocate only for one narrow perspective. Because I think if you become too much of an advocate, then you lose the opportunity to have open communication from many different perspectives, which is one of the great things about an academic institution, to foster that kind of free exchange of ideas. And some people don't feel welcome, or students feel intimidated. Certainly in the classroom, you need to be very careful about advocacy. But as far as collaboration with activist organizations, within reason, I think I would want to invite people to be part of the conversation. And I don't know if that's what you mean by collaboration. At a conference, yes, have sessions with people representing different points of view where they can freely debate ideas. About like using university resources to fund a project for a particular activist organization, that I think is a more delicate situation, and you need to be very careful about that. If an organization approached a university and said, could you provide expertise to contribute to a project that we're working on, then I think you just need to evaluate the request, one case after another, case by case, because there may be, I don't want to say something that would be like absurd, but if there may be a group that was planning to cause some kind of sabotage, and they may say, you have an expertise in explosives, could you please teach us how to do a better job of blocking this type of environmental destruction? I think you don't really want to do that. But if you want to, as writing experts, say, well, we can help you think about the way you communicate with the public, and if they don't have an offensive message, then you might work to collaborate with an organization to help them as communicators, which would be a reasonable thing for people in the humanities to do. So it's an interesting, complicated question that you asked. Thank you for bringing that up. We didn't really have time to go into these documents, but if feel free to look at them, and I'm easy to find on the internet, so any of you here or who may be viewing this from elsewhere, you're welcome to contact me should you have any questions, and these might be interesting curiosities for you. Thank you very much for attending and for your attention and your comments.
Thank you very much, Scott. So before we leave and talking about translations, I thought you would like to have a copy of the first academic book of our Environmental Humanities series. Just a few copies arrived from the printing house in Istanbul this morning, so it's really fresh from the oven.
It's a little hot.
It's Turkish, but it's Simon Estog's The Ecophobia Hypothesis, translated by our faculty member, Professor Sibel Dinçer. She sends her greetings as well, so I'd like to have a copy of this.
Thank you
first,
very much.
Hopefully,
Yeah.
send more work.
Thank you very much. This is so this book was actually published in English in a book series that I edit. So
yes.
I have a relationship with this book and
Yes.
with my friend Simon Estog, so I'm happy to have this copy. Yeah.
And please also, we hope that you accept this little gift from Kapadokya University in memory of your visit.
This is
remember us.
Thank you very much. This is quite a beautiful souvenir, and don't worry, there's no danger that I will forget this experience. Thank you very much. Thank you, Sinan, for being such a good host.
And we hope to have you here back again later for on other occasions.
Thank you. I look forward to that. Yeah. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much, everyone, for joining, for traveling. Some of you came from other cities. It was a great pleasure for us to have you here. And, well, class dismissed.
Thank you.